The ocean holds great power. The sun, the moon, and the Earth interact with each other and produce gravitational forces strong enough to cause the seas to rise and fall. The tide, one of the most regularly rhythmic phenomena in nature, affects most marine creatures throughout their lives. Whether foraging, fighting, or breeding. Only by conforming to the rhythm of the tide can they survive in the never-ending movement of the ocean. On the night of the full moon, on the 15th day of each lunar month, the gravitational pull on the sea causes the largest tides. Some marine creatures take this as their cue for action. Off the coast of Dalian, a male nereis, a clam or ragworm, clambers from the mud in the shallow waters. By affecting the tides, the phases of the moon send a mysterious signal that directs it to make an unusual move. Its body is full of sperm. It's in urgent need of a female partner to complete its reproduction mission. The female is also eager. They meet on the tide on the night of the full moon. The groom and the bride swing their bodies, kicking off a crazy wedding dance of passion, culmination of their lives. After dozens of minutes, the male releases all their sperm, inducing the females to spawn. They even rip their bodies to release all eggs as quickly as possible. This is a moment of birth and death entwined. Their digestive system has been long filled with sperm and eggs. Their bodies are nothing left but skins. They sink to the bottom one by one to die. The reproduction of many marine creatures coincides with the high tide, though the reason for this remains uncertain. Similarly, on a full moon night in late April, a grand ceremony is silently impending on the coral reefs of the South China Sea. The ocean appears a picture of calm. There's nothing to indicate what's about to happen. An egg appears. It keeps spinning and finally breaks free from its parent polyp. The signal to reproduce spreads through the tide, causing dozens of types of corals to simultaneously release their gametes. Their pace is magically in unison. Within a few hours, hundreds of millions of fertilized eggs start to drift on the tide, like an aquatic Milky Way. Many creatures come to feed on the bounty of this annual feast. Corals have existed for hundreds of millions of years, since the beginning of the Paleozoic era. Coral reefs are perhaps the most sensitive ecosystem in the ocean, where countless marine creatures gather to multiply. Over the past 30 years, a large number of corals have died without explanation. The fate of the reefs, which only grow about 1 centimeter a year, has become particularly worrisome. The mass spawning of coral is undoubtedly a great moment. New life will settle in different places to make the coral reef system continue. By daybreak, the vision of reproduction disappears. The mudflats and shallows at low tide look deserted and barren. In fact, it's a refuge for countless animals. Crabs are the largest grouping. In Hainan's perennially warm beaches, a smooth-handed ghost crab is trying to make its burrow bigger. This will give it more room to hide at the next high tide. A strange habit makes smooth-handed ghost crabs look unusually brave. They clearly can't swim, but they chase the waves again and again, perhaps to forage, or maybe just out of curiosity. Not far away, sand bubbler crabs are transforming the beach at an astonishing speed. Sand bubbler crabs are only about the size of a pea. They filter the sand for plankton and organic debris, expelling small balls of the filtered sand as they go. The filtered sand balls are carefully placed, rather than randomly ejected. The sand balls around the burrow are organized in a neat, clear passage. This is very important. The hunters are waiting for their moment. Speed will decide between life and death. Sand bubbler crabs are born to be quick. Some birds are often driven to distraction when dealing with prey more agile than themselves. Within a few hours of low tide, the sand bubbler crabs filter all the sand on this beach and then retreat to their burrows to wait out the coming high tide. The mudflats see another type of crab, born with cunning survival tactics. Soldier crabs never walk alone. Moving in groups gives any given individual a better chance to survive. But it also means they need more food. As they march, they feed quickly, making sure they all get their rations before the next high tide. The tide begins to rise, the signal to take cover. They vanish as one. It's a battle against time and tide. They'll be hunkered down until it ebbs again. With the tide out, it's not just crabs for whom beach life is a picnic. Life in the mangrove swamps on China's southern coast flows with the rhythm of the tide. After the tide recedes, the area becomes one giant banqueting table. On the mudflats at Futian in Shenzhen, the great blue spotted mudskipper can't wait to get out of its burrow. Mudskippers are one of the few fish that can breathe through both their gills and their skin. Diatoms living on the mudflats are one of the staples of its diet. The abundant oxygen makes it quite animated. More and more great blue-spotted mudskippers emerge from their burrows, making the mudflats somewhat crowded. For the individual, every inch of land must be prized and contested. No offense is tolerated. However, there are greater threats lurking overhead. Special danger comes in December, when large numbers of migratory birds arrive to overwinter. For Chinese pond herons, great blue-spotted mudskippers are a delicious treat. The mudskippers are hidden at high tide, but low tide makes them all too apparent. One more mudskipper meets its fate. The wiser mudskippers know it's time to stop grazing on diatoms and get back to their burrows. Hunter and the prey eye each other closely. The mudskipper's dilemma is the choice between starving in its burrow and risking its life by going out. The pond heron is also under pressure. As the tide begins to rise, hunger conquers fear. The mudskipper comes out of the burrow again. And the heron makes its final push. As the tide rises and the sea submerges the mudflats, everything appears peaceful again. But the carnage is scheduled to return, day after day, year after year, in time with the tide. It regulates the lives of all the animals living on the mudflats, wherever they may be, including the hundreds of bird species. At the mouth of the Yalu River, by the northernmost shores of the Yellow Sea, the reeds are still yellow in early April. Every year, guests come from far, far away. This bar-tailed godwit is from New Zealand, around 10,000 kilometers away. It has flown non-stop for 8 days and nights, without food, drink, or rest. Bar-tailed godwit holds the record for the longest non-stop flight on Earth. But the distance pushes its endurance to the very limit. It's exhausted, and its life is on a knife edge. Fatigue and hunger might finish it off at any moment. And the mudflats have not yet fully thawed, making foraging difficult. A ragworm is a lucky find. Fortunately, the weather is warming, and the mudflats will soon be buzzing with life. At least 50,000 bar-tailed godwits pass here each year. The mudflats at the mouth of the Yalu River are their only stopover on their 14,000-kilometer migration from New Zealand to Alaska. Over such a journey, these mudflats are vital. And the mealtime is set by the rise and fall of the tide. The birds wait anxiously for the tide to go out. The godwits must double their weight in just 4 weeks, or they will not be able to complete their journey. As the tide recedes, the waders search for mollusks and clams. Their beaks might have been especially designed for the purpose. Living by the sea all year round, bar-tailed godwits know the rhythm of the tide well. They cling to the tide line, moving to and fro with its movements. When the tide rises, they gradually retreat to the shore, not leaving until the mudflats are submerged entirely. As soon as the tide begins to ebb, they rush forward, not daring to waste a second. A month later, the fattened godwits are fueled up for the next big leg of their migration, the 6,000 kilometers to Alaska. There they will breed to complete their mission. There was no way to hold them to one place. They will follow the coastlines and return next year, as long as the mudflats are still there. The spar-tailed godwits take flight and temporarily escape from the dictatorship of the tide. Another migration is taking place in the East China Sea, entirely driven by the currents. Unlike the tide, caused by varying gravitational influences, the sea currents are movements that originate in the temperature differences between different parts of the ocean. With no ability to swim, jellyfish drift through the ocean, carried by these currents. Jellyfish have endless patience. These polyps can sleep for months, years, and even decades. The warming seawater and an increase in nutrients stimulate the jellyfish to wake up. The polyps quickly clone themselves and break away from their mother body one by one. Their diaphanous bodies harbor huge ambitions. The current helps gather them together, and soon tens of thousands of adult moon jellyfish begin their expansion. The jellyfish consume almost all the plankton wherever they drift. They seem to dominate the waters. But there are always rivals. Moon jellyfish and ghost jellyfish meet in the current. Ghost jellyfish are deadly killers. Their long tentacles are full of venom. Once the tentacles contact their prey, the venom quickly takes. there is no escape. Below the ocean surface, the currents are even more powerful than the tide. Different water masses bring changes in saline levels, which is a critically sensitive factor for many marine animals. There are so many coral reefs around the Danzhou Islands that the flow of water is almost blocked by them. Upcurrents carry nutrients from the ocean floor to the upper layers. Food tends to be more plentiful where the current is strong. Garden eels look small and weak, but they have a unique skill. They are experts at conserving energy. When they find a good feeding ground, they plunge 2/3 of their bodies into the sand, facing into the current. This anchorage allows them to get on with the important task of swallowing as much plankton as possible. Suddenly, the neighbors become alarmed. It's a sign of danger. A hungry stingray. The garden eels quickly burrow into the sand. The stingray has already noticed these tasty snacks. It flaps both fins, trying to force its prey to the surface. But its efforts are in vain. The eels are safe once more. Not all small creatures are lucky enough to live in such gentle currents. Animals that make their homes on the reefs must face the power of the waves every day. The rocky coast of the Nanji archipelago at Wenzhou in Zhejiang province is typical. Channeled by the rocks, the waves become more powerful. No matter how strong the waves are, the barnacles have no fear. Relying on the famously tough proteinaceous cement, drifting barnacle larvae fix themselves headfirst to a solid object and never move again. When the sun bakes the rocks, the barnacles are completely exposed. There is nowhere to hide, and the best they can do is to close their shells tight to prevent water loss. After a few hours, the water submerges the rocks again. Barnacles reach out their feathery tendrils, or cirri, to search for plankton, their main food. Although they don't have to worry about being washed away, they have no escape when danger is imminent. A dog whelk is looking for prey. It tries to insert its mouth parts into the shell of the barnacle and use its digestive enzymes to dissolve the barnacle's flesh. It seems that the barnacle can only await its doom. Yet, it launches an incredible counterattack. The dog whelk is seen off, and the barnacle survives. Barnacles are hermaphroditic, which still must be cross-fertilized. Not being great movers, they have to come up with their own solution. They have the largest male genitalia relative to their body size of any creature. This is just long enough to fertilize the adjacent barnacle. One touch, and it's done. A month later, each fertilized barnacle will produce tens of thousands of larvae. The larvae are spread by tides and currents and are food for many. Anywhere can become their home. Most marine creatures can sense the rhythm of the tide. But only on the Penghu Islands of Taiwan can one see how much people can connect with the tide. Huge totem-like patterns extend from the shore to the ocean. These are stone weirs. They are basalt fish traps, seemingly natural, but in fact man-made. They were created in prehistoric times as static fishing nets, taking advantage of the tide. As the tide rises, fish swim into the stone weirs. As it falls, the fish become trapped by the basalt, a bounty to be taken from the tide. However, the distribution of the traps is fairly sparse. Apart from catching some larger fish, the ancients seem to have no great ambitions. Compared with intensive modern fishing methods, the basalt traps are far friendlier to nature. It also reminds us that having the ability to dominate nature doesn't mean that we are above it. Only living in harmony with nature can we get long-lasting benefit from it. The ocean is where life first began, and home to myriad marine creatures. The sea produces more than 70% of the Earth's oxygen. The ocean currents and the tide, with its regular rhythm of rise and fall, keep the planet's saltwater body in healthy circulation. The health of the oceans. The continuation of species. And the future of our planet are all dependent on this constant movement.